The orange glow against the night sky pulled Beatrice Palmer from her dreams before the heat did, and by the time she stumbled barefoot onto the dirt road in nothing but her cotton nightgown, the little house her father had built with his own hands was already lost to the flames that reached toward the stars like hungry fingers grasping for something they could never hold. She stood there watching everything she owned disappear into smoke and ash, her body shaking so violently that her teeth chattered despite the waves of heat rolling off the inferno. The quilt her grandmother had stitched during the long winter of 1855, the Bible with all the family names written in careful script on the inside cover, her mother's wedding ring that she had planned to wear someday when she found a man worth marrying, the few coins she had saved in a tin box under the floorboards, all of it gone, burning, turning to nothing, while she watched helplessly from the road. The whole town of Nevada City seemed to be awake now, people running with buckets, even though everyone could see it was too late. The wooden structure was going up like kindling, and the well was too far to make any difference. Someone was shouting about sparks and worried about the other houses catching, but Beatrice could not move her feet. She just stood there, shaking and staring, her mind unable to understand how a person could have everything one moment and nothing the next. Then something heavy and warm settled over her shoulders, and she smelled leather and sage and wood smoke. The coat was far too large for her, hanging down past her knees, and when she looked up with tear-blurred eyes, she saw a tall man with dark hair and a weathered face that looked to be somewhere in his late 20s. His blue eyes caught the firelight as he looked down at her with an expression she could not quite read. "You hurt?" His voice was low and rough, like he did not use it much for talking. Beatrice shook her head, though she was not entirely sure that was true. Her feet ached from standing on the cold ground, and her throat burned from breathing in smoke, but those things seemed small compared to watching her whole life turn to ashes. "You got somewhere to go?" he asked, pulling the coat tighter around her shoulders. She shook her head again, not trusting her voice. Her father had died 2 years ago from a fever that swept through the mining camps. Her mother had passed when Beatrice was only 7. There had been an aunt in Sacramento, but she had written last spring to say she was heading back east to live with her daughter. Beatrice was 21 years old and completely alone in the world, and now she did not even have a roof over her head. The cowboy seemed to understand without her having to explain. He turned to watch the fire for a moment, then looked back at her. "Name is Tucker Gaines. I have been working at the Riverside Ranch about 3 miles north of here. The owner, Mr. Harrison, he is a decent man. They got a bunkhouse for the workers, but Mrs. Harrison might have space in the main house for you until you figure out what you are going to do." Beatrice opened her mouth to thank him, but instead a sob came out, raw and broken. She pressed her hand to her mouth, trying to hold it back, but once the first one escaped, the rest followed. She stood there in the middle of the road with this stranger's coat around her and cried like a child while her house collapsed in on itself with a shower of sparks and a sound like thunder. Tucker did not try to comfort her or tell her everything would be fine. He just stood there next to her, solid and steady, while the other townspeople rushed around trying to keep the fire from spreading. When her tears finally slowed, he spoke quietly. "I got my horse tied up over at the saloon. Let me get him and I will take you out to the ranch. No use standing here watching this." She nodded, wiping at her face with shaking hands. He disappeared into the crowd, and for a moment Beatrice felt panic rising in her chest at being alone again, but then he reappeared leading a big bay horse that tossed its head at the smell of smoke. "You ever ridden?" Tucker asked. "Not much," Beatrice admitted. Her father had owned a mule for a while, but they had sold it after he got too sick to work the small mining claim that had never produced much gold anyway. Tucker swung up into the saddle with easy grace, then reached down for her. "Put your foot on mine and take my hand." Beatrice hesitated, suddenly aware that she was standing in the street in her nightgown with half the town watching. But then she looked back at the burning house and realized she did not have the luxury of worrying about propriety anymore. She grasped Tucker's hand, which was warm and calloused and strong, and let him pull her up behind him. She had to sit sideways because of her nightgown, and she clutched at his shirt to keep from falling. "Hold on," he said, and she wrapped her arms around his waist as he turned the horse and nudged it into a walk. They moved through the crowd slowly, and Beatrice heard voices calling out to her, asking if she was all right, saying they were sorry about the house. She could not bring herself to respond. She just pressed her face against Tucker's back and tried not to think about anything at all. Once they cleared the edge of town, Tucker let the horse move faster, and the cool night air rushing past them made Beatrice shiver despite the coat. The road was pale in the moonlight, winding through pine trees that whispered in the breeze. An owl called somewhere in the darkness, and the horse's hooves made a steady rhythm against the packed earth. "How did it start?" Tucker asked after a while, his voice carrying back to her. "I do not know," Beatrice said. "I woke up and smelled smoke. By the time I got outside, the whole back of the house was already burning. It went so fast." Tucker was quiet for a moment. "You got any enemies? Anyone who might have wanted to hurt you?" The question surprised her. "You think someone said it on purpose?" "Houses do not usually just catch fire in the middle of the night," Tucker said. "But maybe a spark from your stove or a lamp got knocked over, hard to say." Beatrice tried to remember if she had banked the fire properly before going to bed, but her mind was too scattered to recall. She had been tired after spending the day doing laundry for some of the miners' wives to earn a few extra coins. Had she been careless? Was this her own fault? "Do not torture yourself thinking about it, Ina," Tucker said, as if he could read her thoughts. "What is done is done. Only thing that matters now is what you do next." They rode in silence for a while longer, and then the ranch came into view, a sprawling collection of buildings with lights showing in the windows of the main house. Dogs started barking as they approached, and a door opened, spilling yellow lamplight across the porch. "Who is out there?" a man's voice called. "Tucker Gaines," Tucker called back. "I got a situation here, Mr. Harrison." The man came down off the porch, and as they got closer, Beatrice could see he was older, maybe in his 50s, with gray in his beard. A woman followed him, wrapped in a shawl, her face concerned. Tucker dismounted, and then helped Beatrice down, keeping his hand on her elbow to steady her when her legs proved shaky. "This is Beatrice Palmer from town. Her house just burned down with everything she owned inside. She has no family, no place to go. I was hoping you might have some work she could do in exchange for room and board while she figures things out." Mrs. Harrison came forward immediately, her eyes taking in Beatrice's nightgown and bare feet, and the coat that swallowed her whole. "Oh, you poor dear. Of course we can help. Come inside right now before you catch your death. Henry, help Mr. Gaines with his horse." Before Beatrice knew what was happening, she was being ushered into the warm kitchen of the ranch house, sat down in a chair near the stove, and handed a cup of hot tea. Mrs. Harrison was a bustling, efficient woman who talked in a steady stream while she worked, finding a blanket for Beatrice's feet, stoking up the fire, pulling out bread and cold chicken for a late-night meal. "I am Margaret Harrison, but everyone calls me Maggie. We have been running this ranch for 23 years now, and we always have need of an extra pair of hands. Can you cook? Sew? I could use help in the house, and my daughter Rebecca just had her 4th baby, so she's been too busy to help me like she used to. You would have your own room, simple but clean, and 3 meals a day plus a small wage. How does that sound?" Beatrice felt overwhelmed by the woman's kindness. "That sounds more than generous, madam. I can cook and sew and clean. I will work hard, I promise." "I am sure you will, dear." Maggie patted her hand. "Now let us get you into some proper clothes. You look to be about my size, and I have things that will do until we can make you some dresses of your own." Mr. Harrison came back inside with Tucker, and the two men stood talking in low voices by the door, while Maggie led Beatrice up a narrow staircase to a small bedroom at the back of the house. It had a single bed with a colorful quilt, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, and a window that looked out toward the dark shapes of mountains in the distance. "The privy is out back, and we have a bathhouse where the hands wash up on Saturday nights. You can use it tomorrow to get cleaned up proper. For now, let me find you a nightdress and you can get some sleep. Lord knows you have been through enough for one night." Maggie left and returned with a clean white nightdress and a pair of thick socks. She helped Beatrice out of Tucker's coat and her smoke-stained nightgown, then helped her into the fresh clothes with the matter-of-fact kindness of a mother tending a child. Beatrice felt tears threatening again at the simple comfort of being cared for. "There now," Maggie said, tucking her into bed. "You sleep as late as you need in the morning. We will figure everything else out in the daylight." After Maggie left, Beatrice lay in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch house settling around her. She heard the low murmur of voices downstairs, the creak of floorboards, the distant lowing of cattle. Her mind kept showing her images of the fire, the flames consuming everything she had known, but exhaustion finally pulled her down into a dreamless sleep. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee and bacon drifting up from the kitchen. For a moment she could not remember where she was, and then it all came rushing back. The fire. Tucker Gaines with his kind eyes and quiet strength. The Harrisons taking her in like she was family instead of a stranger. Someone had left a dress folded on the chair by the door, along with undergarments and a pair of worn but serviceable boots. Beatrice washed her face and hands in the basin, then dressed quickly, her fingers fumbling with buttons that did not want to cooperate. The dress was a dark blue calico that fit reasonably well, and the boots were only a little too large. Downstairs, the kitchen was bustling with activity. Maggie was at the stove flipping flapjacks, and a young man who looked to be about 17 was gulping down food at the table like he had not eaten in days. He looked up when Beatrice entered, his eyes curious. "Morning," he said around a mouthful of food. "You are the lady whose house burned down." "Samuel, do not talk with your mouth full," Maggie scolded, "and show some manners. Miss Palmer, this is our son Samuel. He helps his father with the ranch work." "Pleased to meet you," Beatrice said quietly. Samuel swallowed and grinned at her. "Tucker said you were brave, standing there watching it burn and not falling apart until it was all over. He said you have spirit." "Tucker said that?" Beatrice felt heat rise in her cheeks. "He talks more than people think," Samuel said. "You just have to pay attention. Most of the time he lets his actions do the talking, but he notices things. He said you held it together until you were safe, and that shows character." "That is enough, Samuel," Maggie said, but she was smiling. "Eat your breakfast and get out to help your father. Miss Palmer, sit down and have some food. You must be hungry." Beatrice was not sure she could eat, but when Maggie set a plate in front of her piled high with flapjacks, bacon, and eggs, her stomach reminded her that she had not eaten since yesterday's lunch. She ate slowly while Maggie explained the household routine and what her duties would be. "I do all the cooking for the family in the hands. We have 6 men working here full-time, and they eat in the bunkhouse most of the time, but I send food over 3 times a day. There is laundry every Monday and Thursday, mending whenever it is needed, and general housekeeping. My knees are not what they used to be, so I would appreciate help with the scrubbing and heavy lifting. In exchange, you get your room, all meals, and $15 a month. Does that seem fair?" $15 was more than Beatrice had expected. She nodded quickly. "More than fair, madam, thank you." "Call me Maggie, dear. Now finish up your breakfast, and I will show you where everything is." The morning passed in a blur of learning where things were kept and what needed to be done. The ranch house was large and comfortable, built from good timber and river stone, with furniture that showed years of use and care. There were photographs on the walls of the Harrison family at various ages, and needlework samplers with Bible verses that Maggie had made when she was young. Around noon, the hands came up from the barn for their midday meal, filing into the kitchen with hats in hand and boots freshly scraped clean of mud. Beatrice recognized Tucker immediately, though he looked different in the daylight. He was taller than she remembered, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and a lean, muscled build that spoke of years of hard physical labor. His dark hair was longer than was fashionable, curling slightly at his collar, and his face was deeply tanned from working in the sun. He caught her eye and gave her a small nod, then took his seat at the long table with the other men. They were a mixed group. ranging in age from a weather-beaten man with a limp who looked to be in his 60s to a fresh-faced youth who could not have been more than 19. They talked easily among themselves about horses and cattle and a fence that needed mending in the north pasture, their voices filling the kitchen with comfortable noise. Beatrice helped Maggie serve the food, and she could feel Tucker watching her as she moved around the table. It was not an uncomfortable feeling, just an awareness that his attention was on her. When she set a plate in front of him, he said quietly, "You sleep all right?" "I did, thank you. And thank you for bringing me here. I do not know what I would have done if you had not helped me." "You would have figured something out," Tucker said. "You strike me as the kind of woman who does not give up easy." Before Beatrice could respond, one of the other men spoke up. "Tucker, you going into town tomorrow for supplies? I need to pick up my boots from the cobbler." "Planning on it," Tucker said, his attention shifting away from Beatrice. The rest of the meal passed with the men eating and talking and Beatrice and Maggie serving and clearing dishes. After the hands had filed back out to resume their work, Maggie set Beatrice to washing dishes while she started preparing supper. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, and then Maggie said casually, "Tucker is a good man. Keeps to himself mostly, but he is steady and reliable. Been working here for 3 years now, and Henry says he is the best horseman he has ever seen." Beatrice scrubbed at a stubborn spot on a plate. "He was very kind to me last night." "He has a soft heart under that quiet exterior," Maggie said. "Lost his own family young, I understand. His parents died of cholera when he was about 14, and he's been on his own ever since. Worked ranches all over California and Nevada, moving from place to place. Henry keeps hoping he will stay on permanent, maybe take over as foreman someday, but Tucker does not seem like the settling type." The information made Beatrice think of Tucker differently. She had assumed he was just a cowboy passing through, but the idea that he had been alone in the world for so long, that he understood what it felt like to lose everything, made her feel a strange connection to him. That night after supper, Beatrice sat in the small parlor with Maggie and worked on mending a pile of shirts while Maggie did some embroidery. Mr. Harrison smoked his pipe and read a week-old newspaper, and Samuel played checkers against himself in the corner. It was peaceful and domestic, and Beatrice felt a painful longing for the family she had lost years ago. "You settling in all right?" Mr. Harrison asked, looking up from his paper. "Yes, sir. Everyone has been very kind." "We are glad to have you," he said. "Maggie has needed help for a while now, but we had not found the right person. You seem like you will fit in just fine." Over the next few days, Beatrice fell into the rhythm of ranch life. She woke early to help Maggie prepare breakfast, then spent the morning doing whatever tasks needed attention: laundry, ironing, scrubbing floors, preparing meals, baking bread. The work was hard and constant, but she found it comforting to have purpose and routine. She saw Tucker every day at mealtimes, but they had little opportunity to talk. He was always polite, always courteous, but he kept his distance. Sometimes she would catch him looking at her with an expression she could not quite read, and she would feel that strange flutter in her chest that she did not entirely understand. On the 4th day after the fire, Beatrice walked into town with Maggie to see what could be salvaged from the ruins of her house and to speak with the sheriff about what had happened. The burned structure was a blackened skeleton against the sky, and the smell of wet ash hung heavy in the air. A few curious townspeople had poked through the debris, but there was nothing left worth taking. Sheriff Morrison was a tired-looking man with kind eyes who took Beatrice's statement and promised to investigate, though he admitted there was not much to go on. "Could have been an accident," he said. "Could have been deliberate. Without witnesses, there is no way to know for sure. I will ask around, see if anyone saw anything suspicious that night." As they walked back toward the general store, a woman called out to Beatrice from across the street, "Miss Palmer, wait a moment." Beatrice turned to see Catherine Miller hurrying toward her, trailed by 2 other women she recognized from church. Catherine was the banker's wife, a plump, pretty woman in her 40s who ran the ladies' social committee and knew everyone's business. "We heard about your terrible misfortune," Catherine said, slightly out of breath. "The ladies and I have been collecting items for you. We have some clothes, linens, a few household goods, nothing fancy, but we wanted to help." Beatrice felt her throat tighten with emotion. "That is very kind of you, Mrs. Miller." We take care of our own in Nevada City, Catherine said firmly. You come by my house tomorrow and we will have everything ready for you. And if you need help finding a new place to live, my husband might be able to arrange something. She is staying out at the Riverside Ranch, Maggie said, working as my household helper. Catherine's eyebrows rose slightly. Is that so? Well, that seems like a good arrangement. Though I must say, Maggie, you will need to keep an eye on those ranch hands. A young, pretty girl like Miss Palmer living out there with all those men. Maggie bristled. My husband runs a respectable operation. Catherine, Miss Palmer is perfectly safe. I'm sure she is, Keys, Catherine said, though her tone suggested otherwise. I'm just saying that people talk, and a young woman's reputation is a fragile thing. Beatrice felt her face flush with embarrassment and anger. She had lost everything she owned, was trying to rebuild her life from nothing, and here was Catherine Miller implying that she was somehow behaving improperly by accepting honest work. I appreciate your concern, Beatrice said, keeping her voice level, but I am grateful to the Harrisons for taking me in, and I intend to work hard to earn my keep. If people want to talk, that is their business. Catherine looked taken aback by Beatrice's directness, but she recovered quickly. Of course, dear. I meant no offense. We just want what is best for you. After they parted ways, Maggie muttered under her breath about busybodies with too much time on their hands, which made Beatrice smile despite her frustration. They finished their shopping and headed back to the ranch with the supplies loaded in the wagon that Mr. Harrison had driven in for them. That evening, as Beatrice was carrying water from the well to the kitchen, she nearly collided with Tucker coming around the corner of the house. He caught her arm to steady her, and some of the water sloshed out of the bucket. Sorry, he said. Did not see you there. My fault, Beatrice said. I was not watching where I was going. They stood there for a moment, Tucker's hand still on her arm, both of them suddenly aware of how close they were standing. He smelled like horses and leather and the outdoors, and Beatrice noticed for the first time that his eyes were not just blue but had flecks of gray in them like storm clouds. Tucker cleared his throat and stepped back. I was going to ride into town tomorrow to talk to the sheriff, see if he found out anything about your fire. Thought you might want to know. You do not have to do that, Beatrice said. I know I do not have to. I want to. He looked at her intently. Something about that fire does not sit right with me. Houses do not just burn down for no reason. The sheriff said it was probably an accident. Maybe, Tucker said, but he did not sound convinced. Or maybe someone wanted you out of that house for some reason. You own the land it was on? Beatrice nodded. My father bought the lot years ago when he first came to Nevada City. Nothing special about it, just a small piece of property on the edge of town. Who inherits if something happens to you? The question startled her. I suppose it would go to the county or the state. I do not have any other family. Tucker was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. Has anyone tried to buy that land from you? Anyone showing unusual interest in it? Beatrice thought back over the past few months. Mr. Kellerman from the mining company asked about it a while back, said they were considering expanding their operations and wanted to know if I would sell. I told him no, that it was my home and I did not want to move. How long ago was that? Maybe 2 months? He was not happy when I refused, but he did not push the matter. Tucker's jaw tightened. I think I will have a talk with Mr. Kellerman tomorrow. You think he had something to do with the fire? Beatrice felt a chill run down her spine. I think it is worth asking some questions, Tucker said. Men who want something bad enough sometimes do things they should not, especially when it comes to gold and money. He tipped his hat to her and walked off toward the bunkhouse, leaving Beatrice standing in the gathering dusk with her bucket of water and a head full of disturbing thoughts. She had assumed the fire was a terrible accident, a stroke of bad luck in a life that had already seen more than its share of hardship. But the idea that someone might have deliberately destroyed her home, might have put her life in danger for the sake of a piece of land, made her feel sick and angry. That night she lay awake in her small room, listening to the sounds of the ranch at night. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and the horses in the corral nickered softly to each other. She thought about Tucker riding into town to investigate on her behalf, this quiet cowboy who had already done so much for her. She barely knew him, but she felt safe when he was near, felt like she could trust him in a way she had not trusted anyone in a long time. The next morning, Tucker left early for town, and Beatrice threw herself into her work to keep from worrying. She helped Maggie bake bread and pies for the week ahead, then spent the afternoon in the garden pulling weeds and harvesting vegetables for supper. The physical labor felt good, and by the time the sun started sinking toward the horizon, she was tired in a satisfying way that left little room for anxious thoughts. Tucker returned just before supper, riding in on his bay horse with a grim expression that told Beatrice he had learned something significant. He took care of his horse first, as any good cowboy would, but then he came straight to the house and asked if he could speak with her and Mr. Harrison privately. They gathered in Mr. Harrison's office, a small room lined with ledgers and account books. Tucker stood with his hat in his hands and laid out what he had discovered. I talked to the sheriff first. He had not made much progress, so I did some asking around on my own. Turns out 3 other people who owned property near the mining company's operations have had mysterious accidents in the past year. One man's barn burned down. A widow found her well poisoned. Another fellow got run off the road by a wagon and broke his leg so bad he had to sell his land to pay the doctor. Mr. Harrison's face darkened. And you think the mining company is behind it? I think someone connected to them is, Tucker said. I went to see Kellerman at his office. He was not there, but his clerk let slip that they have been buying up land in that area for months, getting ready for a big expansion. Kellerman has been under pressure from the owners back east to deliver results. Did you confront him? Beatrice asked. I did. Caught up with him at the assayer's office. He denied everything, said I was making wild accusations, but I saw the look in his eyes. He knows something, even if he was not the one who set the fire himself. What do we do? Beatrice felt that cold fear settling in her stomach again. You stay here where you are safe, Mr. Harrison said firmly, and we report this to the sheriff. Let him handle it properly. The sheriff is one man with a town to look after, Tucker said, and Kellerman has money and connections. Unless we have proof, nothing will happen to him. Then we get proof, Mr. Harrison said, but we do it careful and legal. I will not have anyone associated with my ranch taking justice into their own hands. Is that understood, Tucker? Tucker met his boss's eyes steadily. Yes, sir, but I'm going to keep my eyes open, and if I see anything that threatens Miss Palmer, I will do what needs to be done. Over the following weeks, a tension hung over the ranch that had not been there before. Tucker was watchful and careful, always keeping an eye on the roads and the surrounding property. Twice he thought he saw riders watching the ranch from a distance, but by the time he rode out to investigate, they had disappeared. Beatrice tried to focus on her work and not let the fear consume her. She baked and cleaned and mended, kept busy from dawn until dusk, but she was aware of Tucker's constant vigilance, the way he always seemed to be nearby when she went outside, the way he checked the doors and windows every night before heading to the bunkhouse. One warm afternoon in late September, Maggie sent Beatrice out to the garden to pick the last of the tomatoes before the first frost came. She was kneeling between the rows, carefully placing the ripe fruit in her basket, when she heard the jingle of harnesses and looked up to see Tucker riding in with a string of horses he had been working with in the far pasture. He saw her in the garden and changed direction, riding over and dismounting in one smooth motion. How are the tomatoes? Good crop this year, Beatrice said, shading her eyes to look up at him. Maggie says we'll be canning them tomorrow. Tucker crouched down next to her, his long fingers plucking a tomato and examining it. These are perfect. My mother used to grow tomatoes like these. She made a sauce that I swear was the best thing I ever tasted. It was the first time Beatrice had heard him mention his family. Maggie told me you lost your parents when you were young. I am sorry. It was a long time ago, Tucker said, but there was an old pain in his voice. 14 years. But I still remember the little things, you know. The way my mother sang while she cooked. The way my father smelled like pipe tobacco and sawdust. He was a carpenter, made beautiful furniture. I wish I had even one piece of something he built. But everything got sold off after they died. I understand, Beatrice said softly. I lost my mother when I was 7, my father 2 years ago, and now the house he built is gone too. Sometimes I feel like I'm losing pieces of them all over again. Tucker looked at her, and something passed between them, an understanding that went deeper than words. They were both alone in the world, both carrying losses that could never be fully healed, and that shared experience created a bond that surprised them both. You still got your memories, Tucker said. Nobody can burn those down. Beatrice felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them back. That is true. Thank you for reminding me. They finished picking the tomatoes together, working in comfortable silence, and when the basket was full, Tucker carried it back to the house for her. At the kitchen door, he paused. Beatrice, I want you to know something. I am going to make sure nothing happens to you. Whatever is going on with Kellerman and that mining company, I will figure it out, and I will keep you safe. The intensity in his voice made Beatrice's heart beat faster. Why? Why do you care so much about helping me? Tucker looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Because from the moment I saw you standing there in the firelight, shaking and scared but not breaking, I knew you were different. Special. And I've been moving from place to place for 14 years without caring much about anything or anyone, but something about you makes me want to stay, makes me want to be the kind of man who has something worth fighting for. Before Beatrice could respond, the kitchen door opened and Maggie appeared. Oh, good. You got the tomatoes. Bring them in here, Tucker, and I will get started on sorting them. Beatrice, can you fetch me another bushel basket from the pantry? The moment was broken, and Tucker carried the basket inside while Beatrice went to find what Maggie needed. But his words stayed with her for the rest of the day, playing over and over in her mind. He cared about her. This quiet, strong, complicated man who had appeared in her life at her lowest moment cared about her in a way that went beyond simple kindness. That night, lying in bed, Beatrice admitted to herself what she had been trying to ignore for weeks. She was falling in love with Tucker Gaines. She loved the way he moved with such easy grace, the way he was gentle with the horses and respectful to everyone he met. She loved his quiet strength, the way he watched over her without making her feel weak or helpless. She loved the rare times he smiled, how it transformed his serious face into something boyish and beautiful, but she had no idea if he felt the same way. Yes, he had said she was special, that he wanted to fight for her, but Tucker was a man who had spent years wandering, never staying in one place long enough to put down roots. Even if he cared for her, would he stay? Or would he move on like he always did, leaving her behind with another loss to carry? The answer came sooner than she expected. 2 days later, Mr. Harrison called everyone together in the barn to make an announcement. The mining company had been shut down by federal inspectors who discovered they had been operating without proper permits and had been dumping toxic waste into the creek that supplied water to the surrounding ranches. Kellerman had been arrested, and in exchange for a lighter sentence, he had confessed to hiring men to intimidate property owners into selling their land cheaply. Does that mean whoever set my fire will be caught? Beatrice asked. The sheriff is working on it, Mr. Harrison said. Kellerman gave him names. It is only a matter of time. Relief flooded through Beatrice, so intense it made her lightheaded. It was over. She was safe. But then she looked at Tucker and saw an expression on his face that made her stomach drop. He looked like a man making a difficult decision. That evening after supper, Tucker asked if he could speak with her privately. They walked out to the corral where the horses were settling down for the night, the sky above them turning from pink to purple as the sun disappeared behind the mountains. I talked to Mr. Harrison today, Tucker said, his voice careful. Told him I would be moving on in a few days. Beatrice felt like she had been punched. Moving on? But why? I thought you liked it here. I do, Tucker said. Best job I ever had, and the Harrisons are good people. But I have been here 3 years now, and that is longer than I have stayed anywhere since my parents died. I get restless, you know. Start feeling like the walls are closing in. So you are just going to leave? Beatrice could not keep the hurt out of her voice. Tucker turned to face her, and in the fading light she could see the struggle on his face. I am trying to do the right thing here, Beatrice. I am trying to leave before I do something stupid like fall completely in love with you and ask you to take a chance on a man who has nothing to offer you but a horse and a saddle and a tendency to run when things get too complicated." Beatrice stared at him. "You love me?" "I am pretty sure I do," Tucker said, "but that does not mean I am good for you. You deserve someone stable, someone who can give you a home and security, not a drifter who has never stayed put long enough to build any kind of real life." "You think I care about that?" Beatrice stepped closer to him, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Tucker, I have lost everything. My family, my home, every possession I owned. And the only time I have felt truly safe, truly like I might be able to build something new, is when I am near you. You make me feel strong and protected and valued. That is worth more than any house or any security." "You do not understand," Tucker said, his voice rough. "I do not know how to stay. Every time I start to care about something, I get this panic inside me like I need to run before I lose it, before it gets taken away like my parents were taken away." "Then learn," Beatrice said fiercely. "Learn how to stay. I will help you. We will help each other. Because I am falling in love with you too, Tucker Gaines, and I do not want you to leave." Tucker looked at her like he was memorizing her face, like he was trying to decide if he was brave enough to reach for what he wanted. Then slowly he reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his calloused thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. "If I stay," he said quietly, "if I try this, you have to promise me something. You have to promise that if it does not work, if I cannot give you what you need, you will tell me. You will not just suffer in silence hoping I will change, because I care about you too much to make you unhappy." "I promise," Beatrice whispered. "Now kiss me before I lose my courage." Tucker smiled then, that rare, beautiful smile that transformed his whole face, and he lowered his head and kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, like he was afraid she might break. But then Beatrice wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back with all the emotion she had been holding inside, and the kiss deepened into something that spoke of need and hope and the possibility of building something real together. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathless. Tucker rested his forehead against hers and said, "I'm going to mess this up. You know that, right? I have never done this before, never tried to build something with someone." "We will figure it out together," Beatrice said. "I have never done this either. We can be terrible at it together." Tucker laughed, a sound she had never heard from him before, rich and genuine. "All right then, I guess I'm staying." "You guess?" "I am staying," he said firmly. "For you. For us. For as long as you will have me." They walked back to the house holding hands, and when they entered the kitchen where the Harrison family was gathered, Maggie took one look at their faces and smiled knowingly. "About time," she said. "Henry owes me $5. I told him it would happen before October." "You were betting on us?" Beatrice asked, torn between embarrassment and amusement. "Everyone could see it coming except you two," Samuel said, grinning. "Tucker has been mooning over you for weeks." "I do not moon," Tucker said with dignity, but the tips of his ears were red. Mr. Harrison stood and shook Tucker's hand. "I am glad you are staying, son. You are a good man, and Beatrice is a fine woman. You will be good for each other." Over the next few months, Tucker and Beatrice navigated the strange and wonderful territory of falling in love. Tucker was true to his word about being terrible at it. He was awkward with expressing his feelings, often retreating into silence when emotions ran high. He worked too much, pushing himself hard as if he could prove his worth through sheer labor. He had nightmares sometimes about his parents' deaths, waking up disoriented and scared until Beatrice talked him through it. But he tried. He showed up every day and made an effort, and that meant more to Beatrice than any smooth words or grand gestures. He brought her wildflowers he picked on his rides through the hills. He taught her to ride properly, patient and encouraging as she learned to manage a horse. He sat with her in the evenings and told her stories about his years of wandering, opening up about his life in ways he never had with anyone before. Beatrice learned things about him that made her love him more. She learned that he could not read very well because his schooling had ended when his parents died, so she spent evenings teaching him, watching his face light up as books opened up new worlds to him. She learned that he was surprisingly good at woodworking, that he could carve beautiful things from scraps of wood he found around the ranch. She learned that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh until her sides hurt. In November, Sheriff Morrison came out to the ranch to tell them that the 2 men Kellerman had hired to burn down Beatrice's house had been arrested. They had confessed to the crime in exchange for reduced sentences, and Kellerman himself was facing charges of conspiracy and fraud. The land that had been fraudulently purchased would be returned to the rightful owners, including the lot where Beatrice's house had stood. "What will you do with the property?" Maggie asked Beatrice later that day. Beatrice looked at Tucker, who was sitting across from her at the table. "I think I would like to sell it. That part of my life is over. I want to build something new, not try to recreate what was lost." "That sounds wise," Tucker said. "Though if you do sell it, you should hold out for a fair price. Do not let anyone take advantage of you." "Will you help me negotiate?" Beatrice asked. "Oh, of course." They sold the land in December to a young couple looking to start a boarding house, and Beatrice used the money to buy fabric and supplies to make herself a proper wardrobe. She also bought Tucker a new saddle for Christmas, a beautiful piece of craftsmanship that made his eyes go wide when he unwrapped it. "This is too much," he protested. "Nothing is too much for the man I love," Beatrice said firmly. Tucker's gift to her was simpler but no less meaningful. He had carved her a jewelry box from a piece of cherry wood with her initials inlaid on the top in a darker wood. Inside, resting on a bed of cotton, was a simple gold ring. "It is not fancy," Tucker said, his voice nervous, "but I have been saving up, and I wanted to do this right. Beatrice Palmer, will you marry me? Will you take a chance on a reformed drifter who loves you more than he ever thought he could love anything?" Beatrice felt tears streaming down her face as she nodded. "Yes, yes, of course I will marry you." They were wed in February of 1881 in the small church in Nevada City, with the Harrison family and the ranch hands in attendance. Maggie cried through the whole ceremony, and even Mr. Harrison got misty-eyed when Tucker promised to love and protect Beatrice for as long as he lived. For their wedding present, Mr. Harrison offered to let them build a small house on the ranch property, near the creek where cottonwood trees provided shade in the summer. Tucker and the other hands worked on it through the spring, and by May, Beatrice and Tucker moved into their own home, simple but sturdy, with a bedroom and a kitchen and a porch where they could sit in the evenings and watch the sunset over the mountains. Marriage was an adjustment for both of them. Tucker struggled with his need for solitude, sometimes disappearing for hours to ride alone in the hills when he felt overwhelmed by the intimacy of sharing his life with someone. Beatrice struggled with her fear of loss, sometimes waking in the night in a panic that Tucker would leave or that something would take him away from her. But they talked about these things, worked through them together. Tucker learned to tell Beatrice when he needed space instead of just disappearing, and she learned to trust that he would always come back. Beatrice learned to share her fears instead of hiding them, and Tucker learned to offer reassurance without making her feel foolish for being afraid. Their first real fight happened in July, when Tucker made a decision about buying a horse without consulting Beatrice first. She was furious that he had spent a significant portion of their savings without discussing it with her, and he was defensive, arguing that he was the one who worked with horses and should be able to make decisions about them. "This is not about the horse," Beatrice said, her voice shaking with anger and hurt. "This is about us being partners, about making decisions together. When you do things without talking to me, it makes me feel like you do not really see me as your wife, like you are still just Tucker, the drifter, making choices alone." Tucker had been silent for a long moment, then sat down heavily at their small kitchen table. "You are right. I am sorry. I have been alone for so long that I forget I do not have to be anymore. I forget that I have someone who cares about what I do, someone whose opinion matters. I will do better." And he did. He made a conscious effort to include Beatrice in decisions, to ask her opinion on things even when he thought he already knew what he wanted to do. She, in turn, made an effort to give him space to make choices about his work without micromanaging. September, Beatrice realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. She wanted a child desperately, wanted to build a family with Tucker, but she was also afraid. Childbirth was dangerous, and she had no mother or sisters to guide her through it. When she told Tucker, he went pale and had to sit down. "A baby?" he said faintly. "We are going to have a baby?" "Are you all right?" Beatrice asked, suddenly worried that he was not happy about it. "I am terrified," Tucker admitted. "What if I am a terrible father? What if I mess everything up?" "Then you will be like every other father who ever lived," Beatrice said, sitting down next to him and taking his hand. "We will figure it out together, just like we have figured out everything else." Tucker pulled her into his arms and held her tight. "A baby," he said again, and this time there was wonder in his voice. "We are going to have a baby." Maggie was delighted by the news and took Beatrice under her wing, sharing advice and stories about her own experiences with childbirth. The other ranch wives rallied around as well, bringing gifts and offering help. Beatrice felt surrounded by support in a way she had not since her own mother died. As her belly grew through the fall and winter, Tucker became increasingly protective. He did not want her lifting anything heavy or working too hard. He fussed over her constantly, making sure she ate enough and rested enough. It was endearing and occasionally annoying, but Beatrice knew it came from love and fear, so she tolerated his hovering with good humor. In March of 1882, their son was born after a long and difficult labor that left both parents exhausted and grateful. They named him Thomas Henry Gaines, after Tucker's father and Mr. Harrison, and when Tucker held his son for the first time, Beatrice saw tears streaming down his face. "Thank you," he whispered to her. "Thank you for giving me this, for giving me a family again, for teaching me that I could stay in one place and be happy." "You gave me the same thing," Beatrice said softly. "You saved me that night when the fire took everything. You wrapped your coat around me when I was shaking and lost, and you have been keeping me warm ever since." Tucker leaned over and kissed her gently. "I love you, Beatrice Gaines, more than I can ever find words to say." "I love you too," she said. "Now hand me our son before you crush him with all that emotion." Tucker laughed and carefully passed the baby to her, and they sat together in the golden afternoon light streaming through the window, marveling at the tiny, perfect person they had created. Raising a child tested them in new ways. Thomas was a colicky baby who cried for hours at a time, and both parents took turns walking him through the night, bleary-eyed and desperate for sleep. Tucker struggled with feeling helpless when he could not soothe his son's crying, and Beatrice struggled with exhaustion and the overwhelming responsibility of keeping a tiny human alive. But they muddled through, and by the time Thomas was 6 months old, he had settled into a more predictable routine. Tucker was a devoted father, carrying his son in a sling while he worked around the ranch when Beatrice needed a break. He sang to Thomas in a surprisingly pleasant voice, old songs his own father had sung to him, and Beatrice loved watching the two of them together. When Thomas was 2, Beatrice became pregnant again, and in the spring of 1885 they welcomed a daughter they named Clara May. She was easier than Thomas had been, a placid baby who nursed well and slept through the night at an early age. Thomas was fascinated by his little sister, insisting on helping with everything from diaper changes to feeding times. As the children grew, Tucker and Beatrice grew too, maturing into their roles as parents and partners. Tucker never completely lost his occasional need to ride out alone into the hills, but those times became less frequent, and he always came home with stories to tell and affection to share. Beatrice never completely lost her fear of loss, but she learned to manage it, to trust in the stability they had built together. Mr. Harrison made Tucker foreman of the Riverside Ranch in 1886, recognizing his skill and dedication. It came with a raise in pay and more responsibility, and Tucker took to the role naturally, leading the other hands with a quiet authority that earned respect without demanding it. Beatrice continued to help Maggie in the house, but as her children grew, she also started a small business of her own, sewing and selling quilts and clothing to people in town. She was skilled with a needle, and her work was in demand. The extra income allowed them to add a room onto their house and to save money for their children's future. In 1888, tragedy struck when Mr. Harrison died suddenly of a heart attack while working in the barn. The whole ranch mourned him, but Maggie was devastated. She had been married to him for 35 years, and without him, she seemed lost. Tucker and Beatrice supported her through her grief, spending time with her every day, making sure she ate and slept. Samuel took over running the ranch with Tucker's help, and they worked together to keep the operation going smoothly. It was what Mr. Harrison would have wanted. Maggie eventually healed enough to find joy in her grandchildren and in helping Beatrice with Clara and Thomas. She moved into a smaller cottage on the property and spent her days gardening and quilting and telling stories about the old days to anyone who would listen. By 1890, Thomas was 8 and Clara was 5, and Tucker and Beatrice had settled into a comfortable rhythm of life. They worked hard, raised their children, supported their community. They had their disagreements and struggles, but they faced them together, always coming back to the foundation of love and respect they had built in those early days after the fire. One evening in late summer, as they sat on their porch watching their children chase fireflies in the gathering dusk, Tucker took Beatrice's hand. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Marrying me, I mean. You could have found someone with more money, more education, better prospects." Beatrice looked at him in surprise. "Where's this coming from?" "I was just thinking about that night when your house burned down, about how I wrapped my coat around you and brought you here. Sometimes I wonder if you just settled for me because you had nowhere else to go, no other options." Beatrice turned to face him fully, her expression serious. "Tucker Gaines, you listen to me. That night when you wrapped your coat around me, you did more than keep me warm. You showed me kindness when I had nothing. You saw me as a person worth helping, worth caring about, and then you stayed even when it was hard, even when your instinct was to run. You learned how to be a partner and a father. You built this life with me, this family, this home. I did not settle for you. I chose you every single day, and I would make that choice again and again without hesitation." Tucker's eyes were bright with emotion. "I chose you too. Best decision I ever made, wrapping that coat around you." "Second best," Beatrice corrected with a smile. "The best decision was staying." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching their children play. Clara stumbled and scraped her knee, and Thomas helped her up with the careful gentleness Tucker had taught him. Clara's wails turned to giggles as Thomas made funny faces to distract her from her minor injury. "We made good ones," Tucker said softly. "We did," Beatrice agreed. That fall, Samuel Harrison announced he was getting married to a young woman from Sacramento, and there was great celebration on the ranch. Tucker stood up as one of Samuel's groomsmen, and Beatrice helped Maggie organize the reception. It felt like the natural cycle of life continuing, new beginnings growing from old foundations. In 1892, Beatrice became pregnant unexpectedly, and she and Tucker welcomed their third child, another daughter they named Margaret Ellen, after Maggie and Tucker's mother. Maggie cried when they told her the name, honored to be remembered in such a way. Margaret was a surprise in more ways than one. She arrived early and small, and for a few terrifying days they worried they might lose her. But she proved to be a fighter, growing stronger each day. And by the time she was a month old, she had caught up to where she should be. Tucker was 40 years old now, and fatherhood the third time around was different than it had been when Thomas was born. He was more confident, more relaxed, but also more aware of how precious and fleeting these years were. He made time to be present for all his children, teaching Thomas about horses and ranching, reading stories to Clara, and rocking baby Margaret for hours while Beatrice rested. The years passed in a blur of birthday parties and holidays, school recitals, and county fairs. Thomas grew into a tall, serious boy who loved working with his father on the ranch. Clara was artistic and dreamy, always drawing or making up elaborate stories. Margaret was bold and adventurous, fearless in a way that gave both parents heart attacks on a regular basis. In 1897, Tucker and Beatrice celebrated their 16th wedding anniversary. The children made them cards decorated with wildflowers, and Maggie baked a special cake. That evening, after the children were in bed, Tucker and Beatrice walked out to the place where her old house had burned down all those years ago. The lot had been built on and rebuilt since then, and there was no trace of the fire that had changed both their lives. But they stood there together in the moonlight, remembering. "I think about that night sometimes," Beatrice said, "about how scared I was, how lost I felt, about how I could not imagine ever feeling safe or happy again." "And now?" Tucker asked. "Now I cannot imagine my life any other way," Beatrice said. "I would not trade what we have built together for anything, not even to go back and prevent the fire." "The fire brought us together," Tucker said, "but it was not the fire that kept us together. That was our choice every day." "The best choice," Beatrice agreed. They walked back home hand in hand, to the house they had built together, to the children they were raising together, to the life they had created from the ashes of loss and the gift of an unexpected second chance. Years continued to pass in their quiet corner of California. Thomas grew into a fine young man who went to work full-time on the ranch at 16 with plans to eventually buy his own spread. Clara showed such talent for art that a teacher in town suggested she study in San Francisco, an idea that both excited and terrified her parents. Margaret remained a handful, climbing trees and catching frogs and refusing to be confined by anyone's expectations of what a young lady should do. Tucker's hair went gray at the temples, and Beatrice found laugh lines around her eyes when she looked in the mirror. They had both earned those marks of time, had lived through enough joy and sorrow and ordinary days to have paid for them many times over. In 1903, Thomas announced he was courting a young woman named Sarah, the daughter of a rancher from the next county over. Tucker and Beatrice liked her immediately, impressed by her good sense and kind heart. When Thomas asked for help buying a ring, Tucker gave him the money without hesitation, remembering the simple gold band he had saved up to buy for Beatrice all those years ago. Thomas and Sarah were married in the summer of 1904, and exactly 9 months later, Tucker and Beatrice became grandparents for the first time. Their grandson was named Henry Thomas, and holding him for the first time, Tucker felt the circle of life completing itself in a way that brought him to tears. "My father would have loved to see this," he said to Beatrice as they sat together in Thomas and Sarah's small house, watching their son become a father himself. "Would have loved to know that his name lived on, that the family line did not end with me." "He does see it," Beatrice said gently. "Somewhere, somehow he knows, and he is proud of the man you became, of the family you built." Clara left for San Francisco in 1905 to study art, and the house felt too quiet without her boundless imagination and constant chatter. But she wrote long letters every week, full of descriptions of the city and the things she was learning, and Tucker and Beatrice took comfort in her happiness even as they missed her presence. Margaret showed no signs of settling down, much to Maggie's dismay. She was 18 years old and showed more interest in learning to rope cattle than in finding a husband. Tucker secretly delighted in her independence, though he tried to hide it when Beatrice worried about Margaret's future. "She will find her way," Tucker told his wife, "just like we did. It might not be the path anyone expects, but it will be hers." In 1907, Maggie passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 76. The whole community mourned her, this woman who had opened her home and her heart to so many over the years. At the funeral, Beatrice spoke about how Maggie had given her a second chance when she had nothing, how she had been a mother figure and a friend and a source of endless wisdom and support. "She taught me that family is not just about blood," Beatrice said, her voice thick with emotion. "It is about choosing to love people, to show up for them, to create space for them in your life. She did that for me, and I hope I have done the same for others." Tucker squeezed her hand, remembering all the ways Maggie had helped them in those early days, how she had encouraged their relationship and supported them through the challenges of new marriage and parenthood. They buried her next to Mr. Harrison, reuniting them after nearly 20 years apart. Samuel took over full ownership of the ranch after his mother's death, and he immediately made Tucker a partner, acknowledging all the years of faithful service and leadership. It was a generous gesture that secured the Gaines family's future and allowed Tucker to finally feel like he had truly put down roots that could not be torn up. Clara came home from San Francisco in 1908 with a young man in tow, a fellow artist named David who painted landscapes and made Clara laugh with his quick wit and gentle humor. They were married in the fall, and Clara settled in Nevada City, opening a studio where she taught art lessons and sold her paintings to tourists passing through. Margaret surprised everyone in 1909 by falling in love with a young veterinarian who came to the ranch to treat a sick horse. Dr. James Peterson was as unconventional as Margaret herself, more interested in animals than in social niceties, and they bonded over their shared love of the outdoors and disregard for what other people thought they should do. They were married in a simple ceremony in the spring of 1910, and Margaret moved to a small ranch where James set up his practice, finally finding a path that allowed her to be exactly who she was. By 1910, Tucker and Beatrice were in their early 50s, grandparents 4 times over, with another grandchild on the way. They still lived in the house by the creek, though they had added on and improved it over the years until it was comfortable and spacious. Tucker still worked on the ranch every day, though Samuel insisted he did not have to work as hard as he once did. Beatrice still sewed and quilted. Her work now featured in shops throughout Northern California. On a warm evening in June, they sat on their porch, as they had done thousands of times before, watching the sun set over the mountains. Tucker had his arm around Beatrice, and she leaned into him with the easy comfort of decades together. "Do you remember the first time we sat here?" Tucker asked. "When this house was brand new and we were so young and scared of messing everything up?" "I remember," Beatrice said. "I remember thinking that I had never been so happy and so terrified at the same time. Happy because I was married to the man I loved, living in a house we built together. Terrified because I did not know if we could make it work, if we were strong enough to build something lasting." "We were strong enough," Tucker said. "Not because we were perfect, but because we did not give up when things got hard. We chose each other, over and over." "We did," Beatrice agreed. She turned to look at him, at the face she knew as well as her own, marked now with the evidence of a life fully lived. "You know what I think about sometimes?" "What?" "That night when you wrapped your coat around me. How cold I was, how scared. How your coat smelled like smoke and leather and something indefinably how I felt safe for the first time since I woke up to see my house burning. That was the moment everything changed. That was the moment I started building a new life instead of mourning the old one." Tucker pulled her closer. "I think about that night too. About how beautiful you looked in the firelight despite being terrified and heartbroken. About how something inside me recognized you as important, as someone I needed to protect and care for. I had been running for so long, never letting myself care too much about anything or anyone, but I took one look at you and I knew I was done running." "Best decision you ever made," Beatrice teased. "Second best," Tucker corrected, echoing their old conversation. "The best decision was marrying you. Everything good in my life came from that choice." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, one by one, in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance a coyote called, and horses nickered softly in the corral. The creek bubbled over stones, the same sound that had lulled them to sleep for almost 30 years. "What do you think happens next?" Beatrice asked. "We are not young anymore. Our children are grown and starting their own families. What is the next chapter for us?" Tucker thought about it. "I think we keep doing what we have been doing. We work and we love and we watch our grandchildren grow. We support our children and help however we can. We sit on this porch and count our blessings. We grow old together slowly, and when the time comes, we will face that together too." "That sounds perfect," Beatrice said. "It does not it?" Tucker smiled. "Funny how the simple things end up being the most important. I used to think life was about big adventures and constantly moving to new places. Turns out life is about finding the right person in the right place and choosing to stay, choosing to build something that lasts." "We built something good," Beatrice said. "We did," Tucker agreed. "We really did." As the night deepened around them, they remained on the porch. Two people who had found each other in the midst of loss and had built a life together from nothing but love and determination and the willingness to try. The fire that had brought them together was long since burned out, reduced to ashes and memory. But the warmth they had created together, the family and home and enduring partnership that would last long after they were gone, passed down through generations of children who would tell the story of how their grandparents met on the worst night of one person's life and turned it into the beginning of something beautiful. Tucker and Beatrice continued to live and love on the Riverside Ranch for many more years, watching their grandchildren grow, welcoming new great-grandchildren, celebrating anniversaries and birthdays, and the simple joy of waking up next to the person you loved most in the world. They had arguments and reconciliations, good days and hard days, laughter and tears. They had exactly what they had promised each other on that porch so many years ago. A life built together, imperfect but real, challenging but worthwhile. When Tucker passed away in 1927 at the age of 75, with Beatrice holding his hand and their children and grandchildren surrounding his bed, his last words were simple and true. "Best life I could have asked for. Thank you for choosing to love me." Beatrice lived 5 more years, surrounded by family, still quilting and telling stories about the old days until the very end. When she died in 1932 at the age of 72, she was buried next to Tucker under a cottonwood tree on the ranch they had called home for over 50 years. Their headstone was simple, but the words carved into it told the whole story. Tucker and Beatrice Gaines. He wrapped his coat around her shaking shoulders and taught her she could be warm again. She took his wandering heart and gave it a home. Together they built a love that lasted. And it did last in the children they raised and the grandchildren they adored and the great-grandchildren who heard stories about the cowboy and the woman whose house burned down, about how sometimes the worst moments in life can lead to the best ones if you are brave enough to keep going, to accept help when it is offered, to choose love even when you are scared. Their story became part of the ranch's history, told and retold around dinner tables and campfires, a reminder that home is not a building that can burn down or possessions that can be lost. Home is the people you choose and who choose you back. Home is the life you build together through all the ordinary days and extraordinary moments, the joys and sorrows, the endings and the new beginnings, and on warm summer evenings when the sun sets over the California mountains and the creek sings its eternal song. If you listen carefully, you can almost hear the echo of 2 people sitting on a porch holding hands, counting their blessings, grateful beyond measure for a coat wrapped around shaking shoulders and the courage to stay when every instinct said to run. That was where love began, in warmth offered and accepted, in kindness extended and returned, in 2 broken people finding wholeness together. That was where everything started. And that was where everything that mattered continued long after they were gone.